Prostitution and Cuba were the main topics discussed in the Troy Library's efforts to educate Troy students on the Latino culture. The idea came after the Troy Library received a grant from the American Library Association.
203 libraries got grants of $3,000 each to conduct programming relating to Latino American history. And so the name of the grant is Latino Americans 500 Years of History, and we've been having lectures and films on all three of the campuses, Montgomery, Troy, and Dothan, where we have libraries.
The hope always is that it will encourage students when they see something about Cuba in the news, that they'll read it, that they'll engage with one another. I hope also students will think about traveling to Cuba and meeting the people themselves in a personal way. So that would be wonderful if the talk today inspires any of that.
Dr. Tiffany Sipul's plans for students go far beyond just this room. She says she hopes to answer questions students may have about the relationship between the United States and Cuba, with hopes of one day strengthening the ties between the two countries.
Students have so many questions about Cuba right now in light of the changes that are occurring between the United States and Cuba. And so I hoped that this talk, maybe even more than centering on or provoking conversation about prostitution, would help us understand Cuba. Learning the language, learning about the culture, learning about the history, asking the hard questions about the role that we as individual citizens can play in forging relations, not just with Cuba, but with Latinos in our own culture. That's the real drive here in this. And if students have learned something about prostitution in Cuba, great. But if it inspires them to ask questions about the history of Latin America more generally, then I'm happy.
One Troy student shares his thoughts on the program and in what ways he felt it was speaking specifically to him.
I think specifically whenever they're tied in with majors of students like myself, or majors and minors being Spanish minors, is really interesting and helps me understand why I'm a Spanish minor, and just more about the culture, and facilitates informal learning. So I thought it was really good.
Ryan Renfrow, Troy, TrojanVision News.